Hey everybody, welcome back to Mind Keys. Initially today I was going to make a video that was a bit more heady, interesting, kind of introspective, philosophical, and kind of more on the deep, unique end of exploring all the conversations about psychedelics and personal development and self-healing that I have on store here for you. But when I woke up this morning and started to kind of plan out the day and plot out shooting this video, I decided that really that wasn't where my vibe was. It was something that felt a little contrived. So I've switched gears here and I'm going with something that might be a little more basic, a little more fundamental here. So we could call this a basics video, but at the end of the video, I'm also going to offer maybe a little more advanced take on this topic. And that is the topic of set and setting, this classic concept popularized by Timothy Leary in the early 60s in the psychedelic therapy world, and for good reason. I have a lot to say about it, but first I want to just kind of offer you a bunch of getting you the basic fundamental information, defining for you what set and setting is, that kind of thing. So let's go ahead and get into it. And first, of course, no video would be complete without a brief introduction. Hello to you if you're a new viewer, if you've never seen me before, the channel before, you're new to the conversation here. My name is Dave. I'm a coach, I'm a hypnotherapist. I work in the psychedelic space, in the personal development space. I really like to talk about the combination of the two, the intersection of the two, which is really what Mind Keys is all about. Here we talk about what it means to self-heal, to transform, to self-actualize, to evolve and just awaken as a human being, blossom in every level via psychedelics, but also via other means, whether it's, personal development work or spirituality or whatever. So if these kinds of topics are your interest, you're in the right place. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining the conversation. And let's get on to it here. So really briefly here, I want to just define set and setting for anyone who may be totally new to the concept here, which would be a little bit of a shocker because I do like to think of my channel as being not that much of an introductory channel and a little bit more of a kind of intermediate to advanced working with psychedelics channel. But for anyone who's totally brand new to psychedelics, curious about it, has seen the term, and is somehow seeing this video first, set and setting basically is the kind of fundamental thing you want to know about how to work with psychedelics. Set being your mindset. So that includes kind of your attitudes, your kind of state, your emotions, your sense of self, where you're at in your life in that current moment, these kinds of things. What is kind of the psychology of how you're doing and what's going on with you in general in this moment of your life. And setting, of course, is your environment, your surroundings, the people around you, the relationships between the people around you, the literally, are you outdoors? Are you indoors? Are you, do you feel safe? Do you not feel safe? Are you comfortable? Are you uncomfortable? Are you on a chair? Are you on a bed? Are you on the floor? Do you have food? Do you not have food? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, what is your environment like? And how does that impact how you feel? Now, there's a lot more to say about that I'll unpack in just a moment, but I just want to kind of define that really briefly. So historically, set and setting is really something that came along with the early psychedelic research, starting in the kind of mid to late 50s with Alfred Matthew Hubbard, as far as I understand here. And this is I'm sourcing this from Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. But this was also something that I kind of, come from him and his observations of psychedelics and psychedelic work down in Mexico, and then were brought into the psychedelic therapy world at Harvard with Leary and his kind of all his collaborators that he was working with, and rapidly became a commonly understood and agreed observation amongst early psychedelic researchers as early as 1961. So set and setting was something that was really set up from very early on with this work in terms of its modern iteration, shall we say. So obviously in indigenous cultures, it's a different model, but in terms of modern understandings of psychedelics, this concept has been around since then. So that's kind of your basic introduction to set and setting. And really quickly here, I just want to read you a quote that kind of exemplifies and typifies this from Timothy Leary himself, actually, from a book called The Tibetan Book of the Dead, which I'll probably do another video on or several videos on at some point, because I think this is an incredibly important and seminal and kind of underrated book in my own experience, but that's a topic for another day. So in the book, this is what Leary has to say about set and setting. He says, quote, "Of course, the drug does not produce the transcendent experience. It merely acts as a chemical key. It opens the mind, frees the nervous system of its ordinary patterns and structures. The nature of the psychedelic experience depends almost entirely on set and setting. Set denotes the preparation of the individual, including his personality structure and their mood at the time. So your mood, your personality structure. Setting is physical, the weather, the room's atmosphere, and also social feelings of persons present towards one another, and then also cultural. What are the prevailing views in the culture as far as what's real and what isn't at that time? So all of these kind of factor into what set and setting is. Now, I want to kind of lay out an idea here for you about why this is important. So you'll see a lot if you're researching psychedelics, whether you're new to psychedelics and you're learning about them to possibly take them, or you're an old school psychonaut and you've been around the block with psychedelics and you already know about set and setting. It's just one of these common talking points, because obviously as Leary thought and his peers thought, it's incredibly definitive to what kind of experience you have. It shapes what kind of experience you have in a profound way. Well, why is this? Here's the thing that it's kind of obvious maybe, but it's one of these things that nobody says. And it's so funny how often it's these very basic, fundamental, obvious things that are actually the important, juicy, key thing to understand. And yet these things are so often unspoken. So the unspoken obvious thing here with set and setting is that when you take a psychedelic, you become moderately to highly suggestible. So when you take a psychedelic, you are much more open to suggestions. Your nervous system, your mind becomes much more fluid and flexible. Your identity becomes much more fluid and flexible. Your sense of what's real can become fluid and flexible if you take a high enough dose. And with that might sound terrifying or like a bad thing. It's not necessarily, but with that comes like a more porousness in terms of your inputs. So what people say to you, what people think about you, experiences happening around you tend to impact you more. You become much more suggestible, much in the same way that you might in, say, a hypnosis session, or, obviously there are other drugs that are out there that people, use to put people in a highly suggestible state. Psychedelics do this to some degree. Now, if you have a very strong personality structure, or you are really used to working with psychedelics, or you're really discerning, it's very possible to not be totally at the whim of suggestibility and the input of others. But for most people, for your average person who's kind of, maybe moderately developed in their sense of self and their sense of personality, or is just very open-minded, or just open, or in a trusting, relaxed state, anything like that, you will find that you are much more open to suggestions and inputs, even at the unconscious level. And that's important to understand about taking psychedelics. When you take them, you become more impressionable. You're like a child again, which is a beautiful state to be. You have all the wonder and all the innocence and all the joy and the delight that children experience, but also you're much more suggestible, right? So you want to know that, because you want to account for that essentially with your session. You want to be with people you know that you trust and feel safe with. You want to be in a good headspace so that, generally speaking, you're comfortable and you're okay with, moving through all kinds of different states, and you're not having a bunch of stuff come up, or you're not processing a lot of stuff. You want to be generally in an environment that's, aesthetically pleasing and comforting and beautiful, and, creates a nice impression for you, so that all of that is a stream of inputs that's giving you good, positive kind of connotations and information to you. So that's really important. One of the key things to understand about working with psychedelics is the suggestibility, because it's just part of what happens when your identity becomes more malleable. There's a lot of beauty that comes out of that. And again, over time, as you become more skillful, it's easier to know how to assert your boundaries of your identity and your ego if you need to, and when you're psychedelic. But for the average person, this is a key important piece of information. I know I'm harping on it, but it's important. This is why set and setting is what it is. So there's that. So this is kind of, up to this point in the video, I'm just kind of framing out the common knowledge here. So basically, set and setting is your mindset, your environment. You you want to really manage that because it very much shapes the kind of experience you have on the internal. You become more suggestible with psychedelics, which is something people don't say often enough. And that's really all there is to know about set and setting. If you are new and you're just kind of wrapping your head around using psychedelics, how to use them, when to use them, what to do, you want to plan for that. So you want a trip sitter. You want a safe space that's not going to be interrupted by cops or neighbors. You want something that's just really chill and calm and peaceful. You don't want crazy, dogs running around, causing a ruckus, being, pain at everyone's, butt if you're just laying around spacing out. You want, easy foods that are easy to reach and, comfortable to eat. You want plenty of water on hand. You probably want a nice yard or a piece of nature to go out into. You probably want, great music around you. You want an environment that smells nice and is clean and well organized. These kinds of things, these very basic kind of things all start to matter a lot more when you're doing psychedelics. So that's kind of the basic fundamental message here for anyone who's new to psychedelics. That's what set and setting is. Make sure you have these things proper. So in the next section here, I'm going to talk a bit about my own experience with set and settings, having done, hundreds of psychedelic experiences in my life and having done them in different settings and different phases of my life. I've got a lot to say. So that was kind of the official line of what everyone should know and what the basics are. But in this next section here, I'm going to unpack it, share my own personal experience, my own opinions about it. Okay, so time to give my own opinion here, my own experiences. And this is perhaps a little bit more of an advanced or an intermediate view on set and setting. So this is, again, if you are brand new, you're basic, you're just starting off with psychedelics, go with really heeding the advice about set and setting. It's going to serve you well. It's definitely going to set you up for success with psychedelics, which is what you want, because not having a successful experience can be really upsetting and really stressful. So all that being said, if you've got, you've kind of got your sea legs, so to speak, you've gotten used to using psychedelics, you've got, 20, 30, 50 trips under your belt, you're really comfortable with working with them. You know what the body load and the body sensations are like. You've dealt with maybe a little bit of anxiety, come up anxiety, that kind of a thing, or maybe some moments of melancholy and you know how to move through it. Or you just generally have a sense of how you relate and react to psychedelics. Then here's what I have to say, for my own, for anyone in that situation. So if you are intermediate or beyond, or you are, you just want to know my own experience as someone who's had hundreds of psychedelic experiences, here's my thoughts on set and setting. So I'm going to be a little scandalous here. So that's why I'm kind of like framing this all up and preempting it. So first thing I would say is it's not as important as they make it out to be initially. So I know I'm totally contradicting what I just said, but in my own experience, once you get skillful with using psychedelics, set and setting matters so much less. Now, there's a few reasons for that, and I want to give a few examples to kind of, point this out. So this is a conversation I've had online with a bunch of different people. Some people get upset that I share this message or that this is my opinion, but I have to be real and I have to be truthful about what I've seen, what I've experienced. So where to start with this? Well, first things first, obviously, the popularity of psychedelics these days, as we know it now, is largely because of psychedelic therapy and the major successes that are happening in the field of psychedelic therapy. Now, in a psychedelic therapy setting, obviously, the setting part of the equation is dialed in. So they've got a really nice safe space in a university or in a hospital, but the rooms are all decorated beautifully and comfortably, and it doesn't feel like a hospital room. And you're there with, people monitoring your health. So, you're safe and they would know how to take care of you if anything was problematic. And you've got 2 therapists on hand, if not more. So they're looking out for your mental, emotional well-being, and they've got the proper music and everything's dialed in setting wise. But obviously when you're talking about psychedelic therapy, the set part of the equation is usually a big problem, right? So when people are in psychedelic therapy, they're there because they have PTSD. They're there because they're, treatment-resistant depression. They're there because they have, persistent anxiety. They're there because they have end-of-life anxiety, or, profound grief that they haven't been able to get over. Something like this, right? Something really big and intense that's kind of defining their life experience. So the set part of the equation there is really different, and yet these people, from most of the trip reports I've read from these types of experiences, say that these experiences are difficult, they're challenging, and because they're therapeutic, we're talking very high doses here, and they're being directed to kind of look at, these pain points, these issues in their life. But these people are coming in with arguably a much less than ideal mindset, and still moving through the experiences and having very positive, profoundly good realizations and breakthroughs. So that kind of negates the set side of things a little bit. In terms of the setting side of things, I know for myself, once I kind of, again, got my sea legs with psychedelics, there was a huge piece of my exploration that was recreational. So that meant going to rock concerts and festivals, and I was a hippie, so I was following the Grateful Dead and Fish around and those kinds of things, going to raves and dance and kind of club events and stuff like this, going to Burning Man, going to all kinds of large chaotic events where there's all kinds of stuff happening, and there are all kinds of vibes. There are friendly people, there are unfriendly people, there are rude people. There are, moments where you're claustrophobically crammed in. There are, if you're out in the desert at Burning Man, you're possibly dehydrated and exhausted, and it's hot and it's raining and there's dust storms, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So in terms of setting, I've been in all kinds of wildly chaotic, generally safe, but still very unpredictable settings with all kinds of different characters and people in it. And, when I was young and I was reckless, I'd, taken them and taken huge hikes through parks and cities that I lived in, that kind of thing, where anything could happen. And all of these environments are very common for people to take psychedelics in. Whether it's a city park, like I'm sure, for people in New York City, tripping in the park there, is super common. I know in San Francisco, same thing, Golden Gate Park, people trip in the park all the time. It's a very normal thing to do. If you go to Burning Man or a rave or a Fish concert or anything like that, a huge chunk of the population there are going to be high on psychedelics at any given moment. And yet, generally speaking, most of these people come through it with really positive experiences. Most of these people don't have bad trips. Sure, they happen. Yes, I've seen them happen. Yes, I've held space for people when they happen. I know that they're a factor in all these environments, that they do happen, and the environment does factor into this. So I don't want to discount it, but it's not all defining the way Leary, may have, connotated in the quote that I'd read earlier. So with setting, once you get used to it, if you know how to work with psychedelic, your limit, you're not taking too much. Obviously, same with like drinking. If you have a couple of drinks in public, that's one thing. If you have a bunch of drinks in public, that's a different thing, right? Like it becomes more dangerous. It's more reckless. It's kind of not the wisest choice. Same thing with any drug. Like if you're stoned out of your gourd in public, that's a different thing than being mildly buzzed. Same thing with psychedelics. So in my own experience, there are huge exceptions to set and setting. On the set side of things, I can think of one of my earliest trips. This is probably my second or third trip, maybe. I just broken up with my first serious girlfriend, and I was devastated. I was heartbroken. I was wrecked. I, had never been through anything like that, and I was just totally destroyed from it. And I took acid with some friends at a death metal concert that night, and lo and behold, I worked through all the issues I was having and all the grieving and all the sadness, and had a great time, had an awesome night at a death metal show, grieving the loss of my first serious relationship. So, set and setting, it really depends on the person. The other way around though, I've also had it the other way around, where I'm in an ideal setting with, what I thought things were going great in my life. And then I take a psychedelic and I'm overcome with waves of grief or waves of insecurity and awkwardness. I mean, this happens too. So I want to make it really clear that, that element of chaos, which I'll link the video above here, that I'd mentioned in a recent video, the messy truth about recreational versus therapeutic. This really ties into that. Set and setting ties into that. It's not as neat and clean as, people would like to make it out to be in the psychedelic therapy world. It just isn't, because psychedelics are chaotic, right? So set and setting is helpful. It's good advice. But if you are, again, skilled with working with a psychedelic, then you can kind of work around and, take them in these cool, experiences, like going on a long hike with friends, or going to a festival like Burning Man, or, you can take them, when maybe you're not having the best moment in life and you need to process. I know a lot of people who actually do that, who use psychedelics, privately, personally, when they're going through a rough moment, when they're struggling, or they don't know what the next step in their life is, or they're feeling kind of stagnant. Like it's a very common way to use psychedelics, actually. But in theory, that's bad use, because, your set isn't right. You want to take it when you're happy. So anyways, I do think there's some validity to set and setting, but I don't think it's a hard and fast rule. I do think it's important to, remember and understand that you are more impressionable when you're psychedelic, and things can get in. I've had all kinds of experiences like that, where things I didn't expect to kind of get into my subconscious did from the psychedelic. But the other side of the coin is that if you're generally skillful with it, you have a lot more leeway there. So that's what I would like you to know about set and setting. So if you are considering doing psychedelics, definitely go with the best practices. Factor all those things in. There's nothing wrong with making sure you're in a good mood before you take them. And there's nothing wrong with having a sweet environment that you feel really safe in, around people you feel really, really good around, making everything really nice. It does make the whole experience much more enjoyable and pleasant, and kind of helps you to reflect less and get less hung up on the environment around you, which I think is really the value in set and setting. It helps you to it helps you smooth those things out, so that they're not obstacles that keep you processing them. Because what can happen is that you come up on a macrodose, let's say, of a psychedelic, and you are in a setting maybe that you're a little uncomfortable in, and that becomes blatantly obvious to you, and you start processing, and you kind of just get fixated. And you can kind of just start really overthinking about what's awkward about this environment, why I don't feel safe, I don't feel good in this way or that way. And that can kind of become the focus, and really take away from the opportunity to really explore your own mind, your own heart, your own wisdom, the kind of learnings that are available to you when your mind is able to kind of expand and move beyond these very basic things. So that's kind of what I have to say about it. I hope this is valuable to you. I hope this is maybe a new take on it, an interesting take on it. I realize it's a little scandalous. If you, firmly disagree with me, feel free to comment below. I'd love to see kind of any commentary. But my own experience, again, useful as a guideline, but once you're kind of more skilled, not absolutely necessary. There's a lot of exceptions where people still have really great experiences. And I think in general, the focus should be more on becoming skillful with psychedelics over necessarily, your mindset, because that's variable, and also your setting, because again, once you're skillful with the psychedelic, you can be in different settings and work it out. So anyways, all the best to you. Big love. Have a beautiful weekend, and I have more content on the way for you guys really soon. Take care.